Fights break out at malls across the country, and at least one started with just a hashtag. Massive brawls played out at more than a dozen shopping centers on the day after Christmas yesterday. Some of the chaos was posted on social media, from a food court fight in Illinois to firecrackers causing a shooting scare in Chattanooga. The madness forced evacuations at many of the malls affected, but luckily, thank goodness, none of the injuries were life-threatening. But what the heck is going on here? I have a lot of different theories. Yesterday was Boxing Day. Is that causing some of this boxing? Are people angry and upset after the election? The country's so divided. We are all tearing each other's throats out. Is this a bunch of kids who have too much free time on their hand? I mean, this is really mind-boggling to me. I want to start with forensic psychologist Judy Ho. Judy, what is your theory as to what's happening?
Well, Lisa, there's actually some very important factors here. One is anonymity. Once we have a big crowd, it's easy for people to disguise themselves, to not take responsibility, and potentially have no consequences. So a lot of times we see these negative, violent events break out, especially when there is a group. Secondly, the research shows that when people don't really have a strong guiding principle about what they're going to do, or didn't really make an explicit decision, they tend to just go with the crowd, go with what's happening. And that's because human beings, there is an inherent need for belongingness. Even when something is super negative, just like this, they'd rather be part of the group than have to make that conscious decision to fight against it.
Yeah, but Judy, here's something else I've heard in some of these stories. People thought there was somebody with a gun, and they all start running, and they start running out of the mall, and then it turns out there never was anybody with a gun, but it's just sort of mob panic. And so I'm wondering if this mob panic is what's causing the brawls, or if it's the brawls that's causing the mob panic, or maybe there's some kind of weird cyclical problem.
That's a really good point. And I think there's definitely interaction. You know how sometimes when people are on a flight and then they see that other people, other passengers are panicking, all of a sudden they're panicking, even though they don't know what the facts are? It's sort of like this. You know, once you see somebody else around you panic, we are social animals. And so we look at other people for comparison. If that person's panicked, maybe I should be panicked. So if everybody's running across and they're doing this, and they're all going to be doing that at the same time.
Well, Monique Pressley, you know, we live in a country with a lot of gun violence. And if somebody is saying that there's a guy with a gun and everybody's running, you know, I'm going to run too. That doesn't really explain the brawling. I'd love to hear your theories on what's going on here.
I hate to mix the political with the legal, but I think you have to here. Law enforcement is also reporting that they believe social media was one of the causes of driving so many youth to the different locations. Perhaps we need to set a better example from the top down about not inciting violence through stirring up things on social media. Perhaps we need to not be giving an example of causing fights through Twitter or through Facebook or through Instagram as a source of driving things that have real life repercussions for young people. And certainly we know now that fireworks were being used, not guns, but it seems like what happened is that something in cyber world turned into real world panic, and that concerns me. I think it is a function, as you said, Lisa, of our times.
Okay, but Joey Jackson, you know, I've never heard of violence inspired by social media where we didn't know what it was on social media that inspired the violence. Here I am talking about a hashtag, but that's all I can tell you, because we don't know what the hashtag was. We don't know what the social media was. We don't know how these folks got inspired to go and brawl in the mall. I mean, what do you make of this?
We don't know that, but what we do know is that these young people are causing havoc and mayhem, and it's at a particularly bad time of the year where people are there shopping, returning things, and doing other things, and therefore they're exposed to this violence. I do think, yes, we could blame social media, but we could also blame lack of supervision, and it's starting at home, and it's starting in schools, and it's starting in churches, and it's starting in communities to work with, to teach young children, and of course, force to have them do things that are productive. This certainly is not productive, but I think there's a number of things we could blame it on, Lisa. But at the end of the day, I think certainly at home and elsewhere we need to set examples for young people so that this doesn't occur.
I agree with you. I agree with you, okay? I have a 17-year-old foster son who still lives in my home, and I have 2 grown children. And I'm a big believer that teenagers should be busy and occupied at all times. On the other hand, if a 16-year-old or 17-year-old wants to go to the mall the day after Christmas, you don't normally think it's going to lead to some kind of violence.
You absolutely don't. At the same time, you know, you don't want to encourage it in any way or have them participating in any type of violence. It's one thing to go to the mall to otherwise shop. It's another thing to go to the mall and engage in mayhem, which we certainly don't need.
So I think where you and I agree is we got to be very clear with our kids. Okay, you're going to go, but you can go if you're a good kid and otherwise, you know, have a pretty clean record. But if you engage in any kind of acts of violence, any kind of, you know, bad behavior, that freedom's getting yanked back, and you're not doing it. There's going to be severe consequences at home, and you got to call, you know, every hour, every 2 hours. I got to see where you are. You know, let's see you on the video cam. I think we got to keep very close tabs on them, and they do have to be accountable when they come home. You and I agree on that. Well.